Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to this workshop on which we will be discussing the Opendot house standard with an application for the COVID-19 pandemic and all the projects that have been coming up in these past few months. And I'm glad to be co-hosting this workshop with Adriana Cabrera, who is part of the working group of the Fab Care initiative, which has other people who have been discussing what are the best practices in creating maker products that are usable in healthcare environments, that are that have good builds, that are usable in crises, and also with Andrew Lamb, who is part of so many things like humanitarian Fab Lab group, and also the Opendot house standard, who he has been the person who started developing it and brought a range of people to work on it. So I would leave you first with Andrew, because I know that he has two workshops at the same time, but I wanted to ask him to speak first. Yeah.
Thank you, Emilio, and thanks everyone for joining. It's good to see some familiar faces and familiar names. As more people join, I think what I might do is just introduce a little bit about where open know-how as an idea has come from, and then a little bit about how I use it in my humanitarian organization, and a sense of where it might be part of a movement within the maker movement and within manufacturing in the future. So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes doing that, and then I will be handing back to Emilio for him to give you a rundown of the rest of the timetable for this workshop, and then to run the workshop, and then I will join you again, well, hopefully throughout, but then at the end. The slight difficulty is that, as fate would have it, even with remote conferences, there is a challenge with timetabling, and I also need to be in the humanitarian workshop, which is happening at the same time as this one. So, but Emilio and Adriana are definitely the people to guide you through the use of the open know-how standard, and to tell you a bit about how it's used at the moment. Let me introduce open know-how. I work in disaster relief. I'm an aid worker. I work with an organization called Field Ready. And Field Ready, as you may know, is trying to manufacture aid supplies in the field, rather than having them made in the US or China and Germany, India, wherever it may be, and then warehoused in Panama or Thailand or Dubai, and then shipped to wherever the disaster is. The idea is that Field Ready mobilizes local manufacturers, and more often than not, what we do is we work with local Fab Labs where they exist, and where they don't exist, we set them up. So we work in places like Syria, Iraq, all across Iraq, Jordan, Nepal, a number of the Pacific Islands that regularly have disasters. And so my challenge is often trying to work out what can be made where and by who, how quickly, how much is it going to cost, are the materials are available, and essentially that sort of whole process of not trying to reinvent the wheel, of finding out what designs already exist in the world, what designs can be borrowed and copied and reproduced. So you might have some Fab Lab members in Mexico who responded to the earthquake have come up with a design for a particular item that's useful for water supply. And then we're trying to manufacture that same item in Fiji. Of course, I don't need to kind of emphasize that point this year because the COVID-19 pandemic has become a global response that everybody's thinking about these things now. As we've seen international supply chains fail in many countries, and often, you know, it is disaster affected countries that have the worst supply chains in the first place. That, you know, the entire aid sector, but now the entire world is looking at local manufacturing and local production. So how can I find out what can be made, where, when, by who, using what machines? How do I know what exists already? As a user, as a humanitarian, but also as a maker, I might be tempted to start reinventing the wheel every time and coming up with designs. I don't have that kind of time in a disaster response, so I look at various platforms that exist. And those platforms, there might be about 70 of them that we regularly consider using. And some of those platforms, they all have different business models. Not all of them are open. You have to pay subscriptions to access or whatever. But they host these design files and the documentation that you need to know how to make things. So as a maker, when we design something, I want to know where to publish it. As an NGO, Field Ready wants to have the designs that it creates in the various disaster zones around the world available on its website, but also to make them available on Thingiverse and Instructables and Wikifactory and Revolver and DocuBricks and YouTube or whatever it may be, GitHub, of course, to have all of these designs available, to make them as widely available as possible so that anyone else can find them, so they too don't have to reinvent the wheel. So what we don't need is another platform. What we do need is a data standard for sharing designs and documentation. And that's what Open Know-how is trying to do. Over the last 18 months, a community of open hardware enthusiasts from around the world have come together to develop a data standard that we've called Open Know-how, that at the moment is focused on discoverability. You create a manifest and say, here's my design, this is what's in the design. And the idea is that that manifest gets picked up by search engines, by platforms that are trying to host and share documentation. And that in the future, we begin towards being able to do a lot more sort of exciting stuff around portability and interactivity of documentation and designs. But it means, from my perspective, if I design something and I publish it with an Open Know-how manifest, it can be found by someone else more easily without having to go to all of these different platforms and searching for them. It means that in the future, I might be able to publish Field Ready's designs for aid items on our website, but then also, you know, sort of feed that into various other websites to go to where the audiences are that might need to use them, so that it can reach, you know, the Fab Labs in Bhutan or the maker spaces in Malawi. The Open Know-how idea is the first step in something that we've been talking about at Fab Lab conferences for the last 4 or 5 years, which was previously known as the MakerNet, but we've rebranded it as the Internet of Production. And essentially, it's the Internet of Production concept is about bringing people together. We have an alliance. You can have a look at internetofproduction.org, that basically develops open infrastructures for participatory production. So that as a maker, as a designer, as a material supplier, whatever, you can fit into this sort of internet of production, and to bring some of what the internet has done for data and knowledge to hardware. But it's not another platform, it's not another tool, it's a series of digital infrastructures, and open know-how is the first one. Because if you want to know how to make something, you need to have the documentations and designs, you need to have the machines and tools, the people and skills, the materials and components, and the business models or contracts. So we are developing a series of 5 data standards. Open Nowhere, as it's called, is a data standard that will be being launched in about a month's time to share data between all of the different projects that are mapping the geographic location of machines and tools in makerspaces, in factories, all over the world, so that they too can share data between their platforms. Some of the sessions that are being discussed again at Fab Conference, FabX Live this year, are around open badges and badging systems. So we're also looking at developing standards around sort of data standards around skills, and almost in some ways mutual recognition systems, so that you can figure out, are there actually the skills I need to make that thing near me in this crisis response zone in Fiji, or to, you know, if I'm an entrepreneur in Ghana wanting to spread my business to Togo or to Nigeria, or you know, you're in Copenhagen and you're trying to figure out if you can get something made in Stockholm, that you can use some of these data systems to figure out what can be made where and by when. So the Internet of Production Alliance is developing a series of data standards to make that Internet of Production a reality, and bringing lots of different people together to try and achieve that goal. So the Open Know-how standard is the first step. It's been tested over the last year with hundreds of manifests being produced by individuals. And now in the second year of its rollout, we are looking at tying it into some of the existing very popular online platforms, so that when makers publish their designs online, the platform will create the manifest for them, the open know-how manifest for them, to make it more discoverable by search engines. And we're working with various institutes in around the world, but in particular in Germany at the moment, to develop some of those search tools and search engines as well, as a proof of concept of open know-how. So if you're a maker, you can make a manifest and tell the world that your design exists. If you are looking for something that you can make locally, you will be able to use manifest to figure out what already exists in the world without having to search through 70 different platforms. And the session we're going to be going through in this workshop, it is going to give you an introduction to the use of the open know-how standard, for you to make your own manifests, and for you to really sort of begin to have a sense of what the standards that could really kind of form the Internet of Production in the future are beginning to look like. So in some ways, think of this as like the early days of TCP/IP or HTML, or you know, various sort of web standards, but for an Internet of Production. And this is some of the bold ambitions of open know-how, and the very practical realities of the data standards we'll be exploring in the rest of this workshop. Is there anything else I should say, Adriana, Emilio?
We have a question from Cindy. So I don't know if you want to address this. She says, Jonathan Minchin from Bayadura has often mentioned the importance of sharing bioregionally. Are you able to address these environmental, ecological, socio-ecological, environmental, cultural, etc., contextual factors?
I think not in the current open know-how standard, but within the Open Know-how Alliance, the Internet of Production Alliance, I get confused. Open Know-how is a project of the Internet of Production Alliance. Those sorts of issues are almost, universally what ties the alliance together. Looking at I suppose that the key drivers are the desire to boost economic complexity in particular places that perhaps have been left behind by globalization or that will never benefit from globalization. The challenges around just the devastating environmental impacts of centralized supply chains in the current paradigm of production that the world has, the globalized supply chains, but then also the fact that plants have to be modified for different cultures. Like in the Pacific region, Field Ready is working on latrines, and Pacific Islanders, I mean, this is a very basic example, when they go to the bathroom, they sit, they don't squat. But when you go to Bangladesh, the Rohingya refugees squat, they don't sit. The aid agencies that are out there at the moment, UNICEF and Save the Children, have one standard item for both of these cultures. Field Ready is trying to figure out how to adapt that and be able to share those designs. So in some way, the internet production is absolutely driven by trying to address those concerns. And I'm going to be publishing soon more about this in a Local reader that's being developed led by some people in Australia. Hopefully you know about that initiative, Cindy. That's quite a long answer to the question. I hope that's part of the intention. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and maybe I would add that the reason why we discussed about making this workshop is that there are other applications beyond what was envisioned at the beginning. One of them that came up was evaluating the impact of projects. So this is what we will be doing today. If you want, I can transition to my presentation that I have. It's more on the operational side of open know-how, and I discuss a little bit about the about the questions that brought this workshop to be. And as Andrew mentioned, this is a metadata standard to organize a standardized documentation. And the idea is that we can find the minimum amount of information that could be needed to index and to transport information in a more efficient way, so that people can find it, so that there are platforms that can take the same information and you can, for example, decentralize more of the documentation so that an Open know-how manifest can be either in a closed platform or it can be on a personal website, and it can still communicate and be transported in different ways, or that you can create an index with a crawler where people are able to find, similar to what happens with the repository for, what are these called, for IP patents. You can find, for example, on different places, platform databases. Google has one, the intellectual property organization has one, and so you can search by categories, by specific types of technologies, by uses, and by problems that the device or the thing solves. And we cannot do this with open hardware or with maker projects in general. So there has to be one way to do this. And then finally, how can projects interact in different platforms for different uses, either for documentation, for replication, for creating derivatives. So there are different uses, and most specifically directed towards distributed manufacturing in this case. But you know, in the most basic form, a manifest is similar to what you would find on a library. Just an index card with information about the name, description of a device, and we will be making today a manifest just to check, you know, just to have a review of how it works and to gain some insight also from your feedback on how it's being developed by the community behind Open Know-how. And right now, the manifest contains information of different things, but some of the most important are who created either the manifest or the thing, who documented it, what are the uses, either by description, by a field of intended use, by a set of keywords, the language and region as well. So that comes on the line of where was this created? And from this, you can also think about what were the rationales behind creating something. And then the URLs in a more structured way to bill of materials, manufacturing files, also safety files and other assets that can be useful for manufacturing. And from my work on Apropedia, I'm very interested in the impact of open hardware. So some of the things that we have been exploring, for example, are sustainable development goals. And right now you can go to apropedia.org/search, and you can search projects using the Open Know-how standard, but based on the sustainable development goals. So you can find specifically projects that are created in a specific place and that use a specific technology like 3D printing that are meant for something and that comply or useful for a sustainable development. So this is one of the ways on which all these environmental aspects of the context can be applied using Open Know-how. And a couple more things regarding the workshop are that COVID-19, as it started globally, more globally in March, there was a surge of redundancy in projects. Lots of makers started making lots of projects that were very similar. And because people just kept making and making things, it became really difficult to organize them in a way that you could direct and to say, this is a better way of making projects. For example, lots of people started making 3D printed masks, and there was lots of discussion about how effective they were. And also, I could see from the side of users, either from makers who were trying to replicate or to contribute to projects, but also from decision takers, from governments, people were asking, what is the best project? In some cases, people would go by branding of this university or this organization created this project and it looks really good, despite there being many other projects that were probably better. And there was no real way to evaluating, for example, face masks, and it took a long time. And even right now, we're still struggling to find specific ways to evaluate the efficacy of some of these projects. So we will work on this workshop on some of these applications. And but before we get into that, I want to give the word to Adriana so she can explain a little bit about about how Fab Care has been discussing before the pandemic about what are the best ways that the maker movement can apply principles to create projects that are useful, that can save lives, which is one of the tenets of creating impact in the maker community. So yeah, I give you the word and then we get started with the workshop.
Yes, thank you, Emilio, and thank you a lot. Thanks a lot to be here, and I hope that you stay here. So we are talking a lot, but there are very nice activity that we hope you can also use for better practices. I would just shortly tell you a little bit about what we are doing in Fab Care, or this new initiative that we are doing in the last years. Let me just share my screen. Yep. No, looking this again. Let's try again. Okay. Yeah, Fab Care is an initiative that grows last year, exactly as we are doing here as a working group in assistive technologies. And so we did this kind of meetups or working groups during the Fab conference, and this from the last years we start to talk with people who is also working in the similar initiatives. So Fab Labs worldwide that are working in personalized solutions for people with disabilities, and mostly improving the quality of life, that we also call careables. So there is also various projects that present also the work during the conferences in, as I said, the last years. But one of the most important projects is Careables, that is also collecting a lot of solutions for people with disabilities, in which is open Fab Lab Opendot in Milan, also by Enrico Bassi, working in these areas as, for example, such a projects as customizable bike, and also trying to work deeply also in documentation, helping also hospitals also how to get better practices, as for example, if they don't have some suppliers there. I am an industrial designer, and I am working in Matrix and also in Fab Lab Fort as a guest researcher. And I started my interest in assistive devices working in my Fab Academy. So as the other, as maybe you know, projects. So Fab Academy was a very interesting, let's say, workflow, working from the very beginning in digital fabrication. But it enables me in that time to work directly also with a person who has disabilities, and also with physiotherapists, in which I explore from this time until now in several projects involved in this. And for example, this is also another project in which I am involving for innovation and inclusion of people with disabilities in working scenarios. And even this is another project, Makeopaedics, in which we are integrating and developing workflows for physiotherapists, for example, to understand digital fabrication, and therefore documentation is very important. So trying to go through such a problems as, for example, certification. So we had also together other activities, as for example, the Biome Academy or Fab Academy for Care, in which we are exploring several projects directly understanding these steps and working a little bit more deeply in skills for fabrication and assistive devices, and also accessatomes, and yeah, working with persons for elder people, for example, or also for a short time involving very close people with disabilities as co-creation sessions. So yeah, that was like the last meeting that we have in Egypt, the Fab in the Fab 15. So we had this with Enrico, or let's say with the old people, we discovered that there are worldwide many Fab Labs that are facing also the same problematic, let's say, in terms of certification or in terms of documentation, and also projects that even are very interesting for us that we never saw. I think that that's a huge opportunity to have this time open conference and digital conference in which we can work together for such a purposes. And these are some of the labs that also present the work in the last time. Also, for example, in France, that they participate, and also this this time I hope that join many Fab Labs also in these such initiatives. So we have our organization in Wikifactory. We are trying to also document and invite people also to come and to to work together and make like this group, let's say, organic. And this is the idea. I mean, this is an initiative that works exactly, that grows exactly from the Fab community, for the Fab community. And I think that through the COVID situation, we have some learnings, special learnings, and therefore this workshop, it's because we need, we see the need of documenting and to share appropriate information so that are reliable. Another one is that we are, as maker community, we have a focus, of course, of making, but I think that we hadn't in aside the part of scientific documentation. So I think that that's the time in which we see the need of scientifically practices, in which we, especially because we saw during this time that many people, or that many let's say professionals and universities and people who was not really close to the maker community came for solidarity, let's say, for this. And therefore it's very important to have a similar language, and therefore and also an immediately information, therefore open, let's say, open know-how, and also all practices that we are trying to do, it's for such a reasons, because we, let's say, we see a huge value in which we need to make better practices. And I am very happy that Cindy is also here, because he's also working in that topic. And I think that maybe, and also all of you, I hope that you make this experience, that you can also implement this in your future practices. And yeah, I will give the voice to you, Emilio.
Perfect. All right. So now let's speak about what will happen in the workshop, which is basically, I put in the chat a repository that on GitHub that can help you in case you get lost. But as I mentioned before, this is an idea that came up while working with open know-how? How can it be used to index large amounts of very redundant projects that are very similar, and how can you connect them with the people that need them in ways that they can evaluate real impact? So that is, you know, we have the person. All right. Yeah, so that was the main question. It is a complicated question. This workshop is not focused on a very extensive approach to that evaluation, but rather an exploration of how it could work. And more than showing an example, it's more about gathering experiences, like hearing from you what you think of how it can be used. So yeah, I don't know, before we begin, I would like to see if you have any questions that we get out of the way before.
Wait, also, Emilio posted in the chat the dynamic of the workshop that is in the GitHub. Maybe
Yes.
I will put it again here. If you go to this GitHub, you will see the step-by-step.
Yeah, the long read.
The long read, but no worries. Emilio will also show you a little bit.
Yeah, so what we have decided to do is to work on face masks. I believe that face masks are one of the most complicated projects in terms of what is the best solution to choose from. So to begin, we will ask you to go into fablabs.io. Hold on, let's see. In here. All right, so here's the Fab Labs page. So you can search for a mask, and we will ask you to choose a project that you want.
Oh, wait. Emilio, wait. Oh.
Hold on,
Yeah.
There it is.
Sorry, now, Emilio, I think that your microphone was muted. Maybe you can repeat what you said.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now.
All right. Yeah, so I'm sending a fablabs.io URL on the chat, and we would like for you to choose a project. The idea is that in this example, we will test how we can evaluate using keywords. So we go in, choose one of the projects, and we will set up a spreadsheet where you can put your the link that you have chosen and your name, so we can keep track of it. And then after you've selected it, we will begin maybe in 4 minutes, then we can begin making the manifest. So yeah, go in and let us know if you have it.
So maybe for the people who is in the Symbio creation group, maybe if you have already a mask that it's not in the Fab Labs IO, you can also choose it. So just think about, I mean, we will evaluate this during the manifest.
Yes. And we will be using, to make the manifest, one of the tools created by someone in our community. And I'm putting it on the chat. It's openknowhow.makernet.org/forum. And I will guide you through making this, hold on, I'm going to choose one. And you will see that it becomes sometimes difficult if the documentation is not the best. And that is, you know, part of the drill, you know, like finding what documentation is missing. And from there to think about, I'm going to choose one. I'm going to share my screen again so you can see it better.
I have one question.
Please.
The face masks, because I went into your search query there, and there seems to be face masks, face shields, and face coverings, which is 3 different ways of saying 3 different. I mean, people can call it the same thing, but maybe they're different.
Yes.
What are we going for?
I would advise that we go with what we usually call mask, just the actual covering with a filter or a barrier. Trying to, yeah, I mean, we can do either, but the idea is to have projects that are as redundant as possible. But this is of course you know, it's just an idea or a drill of how it would be in the real world if there was a platform for evaluating where 50 people would be evaluating projects that are very similar, and we would have like a rating for all of them. Does that answer or help?
Yeah, I think so. So we just go ahead with what we think, and then we'll see what comes up. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
All right. Cesar is representing coronavirus makers.
Sure. I mean, if you have other resources,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
given we have to document, I'd rather, I mean, I don't know how many actual masks are there, but I think I could also try to just fill with the available documentation that we have.
Yes, that is perfect. And that is actually the problem with documentation. You never know, you know, sometimes someone may think that their documentation is good to finish, but maybe not, or documentation has different words to describe the same thing. So there are different, different things that are happening. So just not the perfect time to have my computer.
Please, I put a link for a spreadsheet. The idea is if you choose, let's say, for example, Cesar choose a project in GitLab that is that's your project. So please, you can just put your name and the name of the project and the link in this spreadsheet. Just we want to avoid the overlapping in projects. So if you can put this, I will again put the link here.
Yeah, and the reason why we're avoiding overlap projects is because I programmed this over the weekend, and it was, I just wanted to make sure that it doesn't mess up my code. I'm crossing my fingers so that it works well. So yeah. Let's see. Why is this thing?
Hi, Danny. Nice to meet you. Maybe you can join the activity if you have your own, let's say, design of mask. We'll just start. So if you can put the name of your mask, your name, the project, and the link, that would be great.
One very simple question is, I assume that the language for the manifest is English?
The manifest can be in different languages. Actually, one of the things that, one of the fields of the manifest is the language of the manifest, and if it is a translation for manifest, and also the documentation language. So that would allow us to have, manifests that are, you would only translate the manifest and not the whole documentation. You know, it's a good way to get started with.
So in case, let's say that the original documentation is in Spanish, I assume that the first step is just to take what is already in the documentation and then label the language like Spanish. So eventually other people can just come and translate this. And
Yes.
I assume there will be some kind of ID.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
You can also select the language in the manifest, so don't worry.
Yeah, of the manifest and of the documentation, or to say it is a translation to this manifest, and then you link it. So yeah, now as we have worked to the level that we have this first version, this is, I think, version 1.0. We do not have an ID for it, but you know, I think because we're only focusing on discoverability, and the next step will be working on portability. So portability will require to have an ID for this and maybe a hash, etc. Andres, yes, that is the form. So I'm going to share my screen so I unfortunately, my computer, so I have a computer issue because I lost my computer before the pandemic and our borders are closed. So I have my mom's computer, which is not good at all. So it just didn't open the page, the Fab Lab.io. So I'm just gonna go with it as we have. So for example, here at the right, you have, I hope you can see my screen, the output of the manifest as a YAML file, and you would add the name of the hardware. So if it doesn't have a very good name, you can say, put into parentheses something like face mask by, I don't know, for example, you know, it's just saying made by whom or etc. Just as an example of what you can do. If it does have a more, you know, more unique name, you leave that. And then the description, the idea is to copy the description that's on the documentation. So description of the hardware, and then you can copy that. I'm gonna go through all of them, but you don't have to do it. I'm just going to show you what, only the required ones. Description of the hardware is one important, just to say what it is it for. And then on intended use, the idea is that you can put, for example, it's intended as PPE for COVID-19, etc., and to have some specific keywords for hardware in general. In our case, because our projects are similar, they will have this fairly same intended use. So we can leave that blank for now. And then the keywords. So we will ask you to add about 10 to 12 keywords. And here on the documentation is list. I'm gonna put it in the chat just in case. Here it is. So at least 3 keywords related to materials. You know, what materials does it say that it uses? And for example, in the case of Hyperpedia, I have added, other than the Sustainable Development Goal, also a main materials field, because I want to extend it so that you can find things that use PLA plastic, or that use wire, you use fabric. So add keywords with materials, 3 keywords with machines and tools that are used to make it. And a more production environment as the manifest is intended to be used. There is a tool list there's a URL to a tool list. So you would link to a tool list, and then from there you would you would draw the AVs. But we'll use the keywords for now. And the idea is to see if, for example, a lab, a makerspace has the tools, or if not, then if, probably I would try to search for a specific project for PPE or for a ventilator that has the materials or tools that I have. Then skills or abilities required to make it. I put some examples like sewing, cutting, drawing, tracing, 3D modeling. Maybe carpentry could be another one, welding. So yeah, and then finally 3 keywords to describe the project, as in it's cheap, simple, intricate, specialized, complex, or maybe something that is non-viable. I don't know. Just think of some keywords that might be interesting to find. And let's see. Why did I leave? Oh, I closed the. I closed the form. Oh no, here it is. All right. So the keywords. I'll give you some time, maybe a couple minutes, and then.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
In the manifest, when you put the license, therefore it asks you who granted the license.
Yes.
And I don't understand. Is any legal person who has to
Exactly.
grant?
Yes. Who is the owner of the IP, the intellectual property? So, for example, the maker usually is the person who holds the license. But for example, if you created imagine that you have been commissioned to create a face mask for a company, and they grant the license that is open, then they are the licensors, because it is a work for hire. And it can also happen that in some cases you have a person who created the hardware, but the software is owned by someone else. You will notice also in the case of license that we just noticed while testing this, that there's no option for proprietary, which is good for open hardware, but in practice, in some cases, you have some parts of the documentation, or it could be the documentation is open, but the software is proprietary.
Okay.
In the case, for example, of people who use Eagle, et cetera, et cetera. It's not here, so you can leave it blank. And that is interesting also to see that, some of the hardware does not have a license. Yes.
Yeah, also, there are some projects, especially, for example, in, I don't know, like in GitHub or GitLab or Wikifactory, they have their own license. So you can also upload your license. So please, in the documentation of the project, look if they have also a license. It is also a recommendation now that we are here, that always think about the license. So if you don't put the license, it means like it's free for use, so like it is, or not free for use, it's like open for make everything, like, therefore it's nice to understand also always when we are uploading or making a project to license, to make a license.
So yeah, I will go back. There's a couple more links. One is linked to the project. You just put the URL where you took, where the documentation is, where you took this from. And a link to an image, we won't use that, but that would help. For example, when you create a manifest, it would render. So let me show you an example. Let's see, on Apropedia, we have a bunch of them. Let's see.
Sorry, for finishing my question.
Yes.
In my case, in our Fab Lab, we made a face shield. So I'm taking that, for example. And
perfect.
The person who granted the license is myself, because I made the face shield for my Fab Lab. And
Yes.
or it has to be the Fab Lab who grants the
It
license.
depends. It depends. If you know, like,
The
let's just
university,
say,
I don't know.
let's just say that it is you. If, for example, they are the ones who own, you know what? This opens the idea that there should be for the next Fab conference a workshop on licensing. Yeah, it's important
Yes,
because
it's very
in some
important.
case, yeah, I think in this case it would be you, the licensor, because you're the one who created it.
Okay.
It can also happen that you created it with a group of people, but you made the documentation. So the documentation has a different license because you created it, and you can give it a different license.
Okay.
You can give license, yeah. So here's an example. I am sharing my screen. So for example, the image can help you so that you can have an info box like this one. This is an example of how we are using it on Wikipedia. And you have an image. So the URL of the image helps you to do that. Let's see, let's continue with the form. There's one that says someone has made this hardware. So that means that it's not a 3D design, but rather that it has been created by someone, and that you can attest that it is created, like it's doable. Instead of just being a prototype made on paper or on a computer design. And then that someone independent has made this hardware means that this is a replication and that the person used the documentation to replicate the design. So that can help you to attest that the documentation is good enough so that it can be followed completely to replicate. If not, then you know that there's a problem with this. The documentation probably is missing some files that you have to remake. Probably you want to make new documentation to address that issue, etc. Then the license, yes.
No, I just want to mention, but maybe before someone is leaving, the idea also of this activity is not only to do the manifest. If you finish the manifest, after we will connect all manifest to see the connections. So that maybe now sounds a little bit long, but it's not so long. I did 2 hours or 4, I don't know. It's really, it takes just a couple minutes.
Yeah. It's just because we're going through the fields of the manifest. I would love to show you more. So yeah, they created, you can add when this was created, the manifest. If, for example, this is an update, then it would have a prior date, but probably in this case, it would be the same date. Well, no, definitely it will be the same date as today. And then the author of the manifest, your name, your affiliation, if you wish, and your email. And then after this, I'll just show you some of the fields so you can see them. The manifest language, to see if it's in Spanish, English, and what country you come from. Let's see. It doesn't have El Salvador. What? Great. Doesn't have my country. All right. But probably you're not in El Salvador, so you won't have that problem. And then if it is a translation, you would fill this section, which is the title, the original, where is the manifest, the original manifest located, so you can create these connections. The web presence, location, the language of the original, contact details of the person who created it, and social media information, contributors, who are the leaders of the project. A version, if you have version control for your project, you could say this is 0.0, 0.8, 1.2 of this device. A development stage, if it's an idea, prototype, or product. Let's see, documentation home. Where is the documentation located? On the previous field that there was a project page, which is sometimes different because some people have a web page and then they have a GitHub repository where they post the files. Archive.download, if you have a direct link to downloading, for example, a zip file where all the files are. Design files, where they are located, the path, the URL, the name, the documentation language of them. Then if the documentation is translation as well, similar to Manifest translation, but this is if you made documentation in Spanish, for example, of a project that was created in English, then the schematics, CAD files, bill of materials, list of tools, making instructions, so you can have a more, easier way to find where the instructions are if they're in a different place from, or if it is a relative path on a repository. Manufacturing files, risk assessment, which sometimes, or most likely not in documentation. If, for example, in the future, someone creates risk assessment specialized for Fab Labs, it would be interesting to link to those. Tool settings, what tool settings for your 3D printer, for your laser cutter, quality instructions, operating instructions, maintenance instructions, disposal instructions, which is more related to, at the end of the life of the product, and source code, standards being used, and this was added because there are new standards like the Inspect 3105 that some organizations have been working on creating, and we want people to use them. And if the project is a derivative of another one, you can link to, and then you can create a list of forked projects. You see this on, for example, projects where people say, oh, we created this based on this other project. And it is a variant of. This is, for example, a variant of a specific family of projects, like RepRap. This is a variant of a RepRap. Subparts, which is getting to, for example, if the manifest is of a meta machine and you have subparts that each of them would have manifest, then you can also have this, especially if for distributed manufacturing, you are creating in different places, for example, different parts of something. All right. Once you have your manifest, please download it. So you can download it on your computer. And now I put this is where it's going to be tense for me. I hope my code works. Let's see. Here's the URL to where you will upload the manifests. So this is a simple form. Do not use the coding practices that I've used because it's terrible. I put the 777 on everything so that it would work, and it's scary. But upload the manifest here. You can choose the manifest, and for example, list of manifests here, and then evaluate. I added some questions that are not meant to be the norm. This is actually so that we can explore some other questions at the end. And I would love to hear what you think about this. About, the criteria that we have decided for now are how effective would this project be for you? So how effective, for example, would this face shield or face mask would be for you? So from 0 to 10, 10 is the best, super effective. How expensive would it be for you? This is not necessarily, like a good way to measure from 0 to 10 to say, well, 10 is super expensive. Oh no, sorry, 0 is super expensive and 10 super affordable. So 10 is good, 0 is bad. Would it be easy for you to find the required materials? So probably there are some things that would be much more expensive in an example, here in El Salvador, I would not be making face masks made with HVAC filters because they're very difficult to find. So in that case, the idea is, well, you know, probably I would not be making a subset of face masks for that reason. And, you know, finding out what materials are usable is also a good driver for the community to think of making for others. How difficult it is to fabricate for you. Probably because you do not have the tools to make it, or because it requires some very specific procedures that you believe that you would be prone to making mistakes with. Could you replicate it? How easily, should say here, could you replicate it from the documentation only? So from what you see on the documentation, is it an extensive, comprehensive set of documentation that you can say, yes, I can make this from it, or probably you would have to write the authors to ask questions. And then at the end, if you want to leave some comments on what you think of, or why you evaluate it, for example, I can say, well, it's not usable. My Fab Lab does not have the specific machine that's required, or I don't know, there's been problems importing 3D printing filament, so I cannot make this, you know, specific things that you would love to say. And then you click submit, and it should leave a message here saying, let me see. So I'll leave you one example here. I submit, and then it would say that it has been uploaded. And that's it. Let us know if, oh, no worry, Andres. Yeah. So it's good. Let's see.
Emilio, are you checking if files are overwritten on the server?
Yes.
Okay.
I've added a timestamp with milliseconds. That was my solution to it. Yes, it took me. I know, because they're all the same name. I knew this would happen. So.
As I was watching your example, I was like, maybe I should have changed the second part of the file. Maybe okay, great.
No, it's good. Yeah. That was actually an extra 12 hours just thinking how to make it work. And in the end, if, for example, if you submitted it twice, it's going to take only one of them. I did the most horrible, yeah. My coding skills are not that good. I'm sorry about that. So yeah, that is how you make a manifest. So I don't know if you have any questions so far. Let's see. I want to see how many people have uploaded so far. Probably not all of you are making manifests. It's okay.
But I think that it would be very nice if you, as I said, just try also to do the manifest.
Yeah.
Also, you can see also the level of readiness of your device when you are evaluating it, because you see that the manifest is going through a lot of details, and you see how good is the documentation of the project. I think that is very valuable in order to evaluate at least the project and say like, maybe that's very good to apply. And after with the questions is you can also understand a bit how you can adapt this for your own, let's say, needs. Therefore, it's the idea if maybe other of you or the ones that are participating in the Symbio creation, that maybe if you are thinking of reinterpret, mask, and adapt for the challenge, I think that that would be a good tool that take just a couple of minutes and after do the manifest and understand it. So I think that it will be very rich if you maybe do the manifest now, or maybe
Please.
time, so that we can also have a graphic, and also just share also with your with the people, also with the colleagues, or also, as I said, with the people in the challenge of symbio creation, that maybe that could be a great tool just to accelerate the process of looking projects in group, and after share it with the community or with the group, and follow also other projects and so on.
Yeah. So in the meantime, what did you think of the Open standard? What do you see in it? We're interested in hearing from you.
I had so many questions filling the forms that I'm mind blown. I mean, even some of the questions, I am not really sure about who is. I mean, I would separate the second questions from the first ones, or the standards. I was like, how difficult is it to fabricate? I wonder for whom. It's like, let's say in our case, it was a bit different, because
Yes.
Our case was a silicone mask made for injection molding. Okay, so it's not like the kind of solution that you will say, who is manufacturing this? It's do I have access to a injection molding factory, or do I mean, and I wasn't even sure if the question was about the actual mask or the molding part of the process. You know what I mean? Like here we have like two couples. How do I set these molding, and how do I, of course, if you have a file and you take it to a molding company, they could make it. Like, but yeah, I wasn't really sure about it.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, it would be for imagine, maybe the best way to put it is, imagine you are looking online and you see this documentation. You think, okay, can I make this? You know, does my lab have the capabilities? Or I made this, and this is what I found by evaluating. For example, I've evaluated. Some people have done literature. Well, you have done literature reviews, and yeah, we've been speaking about this for a long time. And this is one of the reasons why I kind of hijacked open know-how into doing evaluation, which is something that it was not intended to do.
Yeah.
But it's just to come up with an idea of, okay, I'm evaluating 10 designs and I want to see which one's the best. And I just brought some.
I'm thinking I have a database of 60 ventilators.
I know, yes. And you would be the main user of something like this. You know, an expert who has been checking at documentation and says, well, this is what's important, this is what's not. And you would be able to, for example, if someone from a government asks you, what should I use? Which of these should I create? You can say, okay, if you want to make them quickly, cheaply, use these. If you want something that's effective, use these. Probably this one can be, improved, etc. Like there are so many things, and because of that complexity, that is the reason why we're doing that evaluation. And let me show you. I think we only have 2 so far. Let me see. Yeah, let's just go with the 2 ones. I imagine that we would have around 2, so it's good. I'm not. Hold on. Yeah. Let's see. This is the example and this is a random visualization that we created with R. So it is bigger if it has a bigger score. The blue dots are the projects. So you can see 2 projects that have been evaluated. And imagine that 500 people evaluated. This is the average of all of those. And you can see that these are connected by being a mask. So you can have, for example, different keywords, and you can say, for example, the ones that are 3D printed in the network are the ones that have the least score, the lessest score. And the ones that are using, for example, injection molding are the ones that have the best. So yeah, the idea of the workshop is to think of ways of visualizing very complex sets of metadata about how something was created with documentation that can be made in 5 minutes, right? So how can we put together all of these? And if we have more, I don't know if we have more, let's see, let's run the script again. Every time I run the script, I feel like it's going to fail, but it created one, you already saw it, so that's good for me. Let's see how it goes. But yeah, that's the idea. And the question for you as a discussion is, how can we make this better? Or how can we use open know-how to evaluate? And how useful would it be? Especially if we're having so many projects and nobody knows which one to choose from in relation to the context, in relation to environmental issues, and so many other things. So I leave the mic to you to discuss and to tell us what you think.
Just for Inger, I think that the mask armor is just the name of the mask. I think that you have to get the title, and the blue dots are the titles, let's say, or like how Emilio, correct me if I am telling something wrong.
Yes. What was the question, sorry?
Because Igor asked, how can I see in a manifest what the stage is of a mask?
In the manifest, the stage, so that there is one field that says the stage of development. I don't know if that is your question. Oh, I see that there are some comments in the, all right. Yeah, so you would see here, there are 2 ways. One is the stage of development. Let's see where it is. Here it is. Idea, prototype, product. This was what has been proposed by the community of the working group. On Apropedia, for example, we have more. For example, we have here, let's say, we have some, for example, that say it has been deployed, it has been verified by an external authority, etc. And you can also use a numbered version. So you can find, for example, this prototype on a version 1.2. Oh, yes, I forgot to share my screen. Hold on. There it is. So here are the 2. One is the version, so you can have a numbered type of version. People who work in software do it all the time. Us with hardware have a harder time doing it, but that's one way to do it. The other is doing the development stage. Just to say prototype or product. But you can add, for example, to say it has been verified, or it can be, that can be one. I know that Andrew has been pondering a lot about that as well. Field Ready has a much more complete system with Field Ready. I can't remember what are the stages, but Lab Ready, Field Ready, some others. Crisis Ready, I think. Can you? All right, there you are.
It's a bit of a strange scale. I changed my banner in the background. So I have an Apropedia banner. But I'm still Field Ready. I'm just also in love with Apropedia. I think the way that we describe it is sort of, like idea and prototype and so on. But then there's categories that are like maker ready to be made, or production ready, that's if it's a design that is really aimed at mass production. Ultimately, what we're trying to get to is Field Ready, which is the name of the organization. There's different sort of we also have different rating systems for the quality of the documentation that surrounds the design. But really, what the Open Know-How Working Group did in this version 1 of the standard was just try to keep it really simple. And the important things that I think the community felt needed to be shared was, is it an idea? Is it just like a sketch? It's the prototype. You know, my colleague Aziz has just completed the Fab Academy in Jordan, and he's come up with a design for a smoke sensor, which is very impressive. But it's a prototype, and then is it going into production? Is it something that is, you know, a verified design that, you know, can be made? You can just download the design and the documentation, and off you go. Those were felt to be the sort of 3 broad categories.
Yeah, and maybe I could add to this that some of the fields are required and some are optional. And, you know, there's also the possibility to add, for example, if your organization or your Fab Lab has very specific keywords about how ready it is or what's the intended purpose, you can add it on the keywords, you can add it on certain other fields. And that can be useful to create, you know, ways of evaluating like this, where you can say, hey, this project is intended for this, and it has a rating by the community of, let's say, 6 out of 10 or 4 out of 10. And it would be nice to cluster them and to evaluate and say, okay, this project is better than this other. Or oh, this group of projects is better because of this. You know, what are the technologies, the environmental aspects, the contextual aspects of what makes a good project better than another. And that's, you know, it's better to do it in a decentralized, organized way than to have someone saying, no, you should make it like this, because, you know, makers want to make, and you can't tell a community what they will make. People will make what they feel like, yeah. I mean, there are some people who are so in love with 3D printing, even after there were so many concerns about, you know, 3D printing is not the best because this and this. Projects kept coming up. So yeah, I mean, it is a way of clustering people as well who are working together. So if you have projects that use the same technology, have the same purpose, it's good for them to find each other. So this is a good way to find projects and to have them collaborate in a very simple and a very organic way, instead of having someone tell them, hey, you go and work together, but rather to have a you know, a simple way for them to find each other online. And also, yeah, for people who want to explore all the projects at once. So yeah, there are many possibilities to using open know-how.
Maybe I just want to add also from come back to the Cindy question, is that also depending on the place where you are, and also was a little bit our question yesterday, this map or this graphic that you see here, it will change because it will adapt also to the place and, let's say, the needs of your local needs, let's say. Also depending of the material, depending of the machines, depending what are, let's say, the conditions in the lab. So I think that if we see like the potential of join all manifestos, imagine how we could see this regionally, how it works and adapt. That it's a great idea.
Yeah. It can be, for example, that we can get information about who's making the evaluation, and then get insights like people in Africa or in Latin America are evaluating these projects better, and there must be a reason. And we find out, well, it's because the product or the design that we thought was best does not comply with some materials that are not available in other places. As I mentioned, HVAC filters that are very good at filtering. Nobody in El Salvador has vacuum cleaners, so it would be really hard to find those filters. And probably a very good solution that can work in the first world cannot work where I live. So yeah, I mean, there are so many things to take into consideration, and because it is so complex to do it, to have a complexity approach to that is a good way to start.
I think one of the challenges when I was thinking about, when I was trying kind of to fill the file, one of the things that as I was reading the specs for the mask was required materials, because when they were checking on the materials, this is a team that came out of Coronavirus Maker that said we are going to go, given that this might be used in hospitals, we need to get like full certified mask. So they also try to certify all the materials involved. Like, is this medical grade material? Does it, I mean, and one of the things that I'm missing right now is kind of the technical documentation part. So if you are needing like the spec sheet for the material, like, okay, this works only if we are using this particular material for this part, or this other particular material for this part. So like you said, of course, maybe it's not available where you are, but at least if you replicate that with another material, you know that you are not kind of complying with the original spec.
Thanks for that comment. At the beginning of the session, I talked about sort of the Internet of Production Alliance that's been taking part in the Fab Lab conferences over the years. The sort of 5 infrastructures we're looking at developing: designs and documentation, the Open Know-how standard; machines and tools, the Open Nowhere standard being released next month. But then we also have to think about materials. I'm in the middle of a process, which I would invite you all to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat if you have thoughts on. I'm in the middle of a process to try and determine what is needed for a sort of an open standard that enables production around materials. And there's a lot of differences, different routes we could take. One, of course, is that materials are intimately tied to the machine, So the mapping of the machine standard also, infers within it the materials that you can use. And so actually, maybe we don't need a materials standard, data standard. What another option is to try and geographically locate the availability of materials and components everywhere in the world by creating a mapping standard for materials, so that you know where your nearby hardware store is and how much plywood it has, That's a very ambitious data standard to try and collect that data. But I think what you said there, Cesar, about the, actually just, making sure that you have the information and documentation about the material could be an interesting way to go. But if you do have any other sort of thoughts about what a data standard for materials and components needs to be, please reach out to me with some ideas. We have a reasonable sense of what a data standard for electronics components might be, because there's only like 8 major manufacturers in the world and it's fairly well standardized already. But for materials, I really like your input. And the idea is that I use some funding that we have available to sort of invest in the development of a data standard on materials over the course of the next 12 months.
I'm wondering also, I had this kind of 3 questions since the beginning that maybe, I don't know if it's sometime, maybe I can launch them on the table. I'm very happy to be here in the session, because right there in the panel, one of the questions was, how do we track the different ventilator projects over time in terms of performance? And I think this is kind of the first step into getting this properly documented. So I'm really happy about it, I have to say. And my second question is regarding the other standards. I mean, for example, when I was, I've been in all these documentation, I think for the last 5 years in all the Fab conference. So in one of the sessions, we were, for example, talking about open manual to document steps. That is already a standard. So I think that that part could be leveraged just to make sure that everything is quite related to that. But I'm also thinking, I've been thinking lots about the actual standards. I mean, the standards about ISO or all the other, like, because when we were, for example, in this mask, this was like, and as I was reading the manifesto, it's like, which standard did you use to guide your design? But in our case, the standard was an afterthought because the standard was not available for the group since the beginning. It was like, let's develop this thing. And once you have something figured out, then it's like, okay, what is the actual standard we have to pass for the certification? So I am wondering on the relationship from the open know-how and the standards of whether, I have this kind of open question because my feeling is that it's not that there were not standards since the beginning, but that they were closed standards or open standard or behind a paywall standards.
Yeah, and it favored, you know, that it favored industry as opposed to the sort of maker spaces and makers, because I mean, Field Ready regularly has to buy standards, you know, that we certify our designs against. I think the connection's quite strong in the sense that part of the process for developing the Internet of Production data standards is first to have a look at what standards already exist out there in the world. And there's a company that I've hired to, in my role as, you know, chairing the Internet of Production Alliance, to basically kind of, it's called Standards Repo. It's based in the UK, and they do a survey of all the existing standards, including the open manuals. So the next stage of open know-how for documentation and designs, it will be a lot more like the open manual standard rather than just the discoverability standard that we have now. The actually, one of the interesting areas for materials is to have a look at customs regulations, because the World Trade Organization's classifications of materials really does just come from you know, an international standard. So a lot of these, some of these standards are open in the sense that they're publicly available, but if you wanted to use them in your own organization, in your own Fab Lab, you would need to pay a fee to access them. And if I were to take them and publish them all on the Field Ready website, I would get into trouble. Like, that I can't, we just can't do that. That is not a viable business model. I think these standards bodies are really panicking about, like a lot of publishers, about their business model in a digital age.
I'm thinking of them as in the same way as paper publishing. I mean, academic paper publishing. It's like, because I think one of the challenges for the open, I mean, when I was filling the form, I said, what is the standard we are talking? And then I could link to a standard, but the standard is not available. So we are again in this kind of, yeah, it's based on standards, but you cannot read that. So it's like, what?
Yep. And the Internet of Production Alliance is all about trying to create the conditions for participatory production, for what I call massive small manufacturing. And I think that's, we need to unpack those standards and kind of, you know, reinvent our own. But I think for the documentation side of things, I think the open manual standard, thanks for sharing the link there, is a really good way to go. What we are trying to think about for what's next with open know-how is that interactivity type stuff. That it's almost, you know, with a lot of software, you can sort of mix and remix software code, you know, maybe there's a future where we can really enable that with hardware, no matter which platform it is published on, and where you can almost sort of get to a point where you can say, well, actually, I only need one face shield, so 3D print it. But if you need 100,000 face shields, here's the design for the dye stamp or the injection mold tooling that you need. And it's, you know, it's just something that, you know, the Internet of Production will be able to help you figure that out.
Maybe I just want to add just a short comment about the open know-how, and also especially here in Europe, that the European projects, and I guess that also, especially for the issue of COVID, they are turning on to open science. So all projects, let's say, it has to now face the issue of publications, and especially dissertation should be also aligned to the open science, which is also very positive, also connected with the open know-how. That it's also, especially for assistive devices, was always a huge issue to have a standardization of, let's say, in here in Europe, and at least in Germany, it's almost impossible, which makes a huge, let's say, 360 degrees turn through the COVID to understand that now we need something like open know-how to standardize what we are, let's say, designing, or through the pandemic.
Absolutely. Assistive devices, I mean, are almost by definition, you know, personal. And it's really, really a challenging area. I just wanted to react to something in the chat, Andres, that XKCD article, cartoon about we need a standard, and suddenly we have situation 14 standards. We need a standard to tie them all together. Situation, we have 15 standards. I used that in the opening remarks of the Open Know-How Alliance, of the Open Know-How Working Group that created this standard. And yeah, I am worried about that. But happily, there is quite a bit of uptake of open know-how, and over the next year, we'll be integrating it into some of the behind the scenes of some of the main platforms. So wish us luck. Otherwise, we'll just have not just 70 platforms, but then also 15 standards to contend with.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been collaborating on making this. So there's just a few of us here, but there's people from different organizations from, oh man, Andrew knows them all probably, but at universities, people who with the Open Hardware Association, Open Source Ecology Germany, University of Bath, Field Ready, Apropedia. Yeah, I mean, I think Andrew has done a great job in just bringing people together. And I think this was an incipient time where people were thinking, hey, there should be a standard and you know, we all came together and we worked on this, and we plan on collaborating more and bringing this forward. And yes, of course, there are different uses, and that is exactly why this workshop came to be, because there are many applications to doing something like to using metadata. And yeah, I think the good thing about the standard as it is that it is very simple and it is extensible, you know, and it's just a matter of making sure that we all communicate with the same language, using the same words. To what do we mean by, you know, was it made, or what does it mean to assembly files, or et cetera, et cetera. So as long as we have a common set of vocabulary, I think we'll do good enough. Even if it is, if other people fork it into using different formats for that information.
I think it could also be very useful for, well, we are writing a paper right now on face shields. And I think it's also very interesting to highlight some hidden controversies in hardware that are there. I mean, well, for example, just to give you one particular example that we are like dissecting right now, in Spain, we had the very same device accepted in some regions and rejected on other regions, or forbidden in some regions. Like, no, you cannot take this to hospitals, never. This is forbidden. And then we just discovered after like 3 months that none of the regions had nothing to say about that. So we got kind of a national validation that was done by the health and safety standards. That is kind of a national body that would serve as certification for all the 17 regions. So if we had this tool just to map, okay, this was certified or validated in this region, and this in the other, and this in the other, we could have this kind of common standards and try to visualize. And then in the end, we would say, this kind of national regions, it's kind of I'd say overtakes all the smaller ones, because in the end, these were neither necessary, neither useful, neither legal. I mean, so I think it could be, I mean, legal in terms of that the regional body had nothing to say about that, but we were not aware of that. Indeed, I think no one was really aware of who has, I mean, it was kind of a free-for-all melee of who has the final word and who is to show and display power around what is happening in that moment.
In some ways, those situations show how essentially, you know, the way standards and decisions are made around quality, how the current practices have emerged are as arbitrary, as emergent as some of the digital approaches that we're beginning to see emerge now. That, you know, if we were going to design, and it says this in the Internet of Production website, I think, if we were going to design manufacturing with the sort of technology base that we have, technology available, we have available to us today, it wouldn't look like ISO standards and national certification bodies, or outsourcing to certification companies and things like that. It would look a lot more sort of grassroots up sort of thing. It would look a lot more digitally enabled. And but yeah, the arbitrariness of the situation that you're describing there, Cesar, is unfortunately echoed in a number of sectors, including my own in disaster relief, where, you know, just 2 months ago, I was told by UNDP that operate makerspaces, United Nations Development Program. They operate innovation labs and makerspaces in a number of countries around the world, that they would not be producing PPE, face shields, because it wouldn't meet local standards. And it wouldn't meet WHO standards. And I'm sat there going, there aren't WHO standards. There are guidelines that are meant to inform your own, your own work. Like, they're there to enable you to do things, not to stop you from doing things. And I think, unfortunately, we do have a bureaucratic mentality that kicks in sometimes.
I would say maybe Sherry knows more about this, or should know more about this. When I was talking to Dan to prepare our session yesterday, we just discovered that there is this kind of, in the United States, there are labs on the Veteran Health Association, VHA. I don't know the actual role, but from what I've learned, they were validating 3D designs, 3D printed designs, masks, and whatever. So I'm thinking of how we could like add this layer of the manifest to designs that are already approved. in terms of discoverability. I think it could be really useful because they have a list of, oh, we have this available. Okay, has been validated by the Veteran Army Association in their labs. Okay, so we could have these kind of conversations with local and national groups. Did you get any kind of validation? So we could start tracing a map of what is certified already, because I think it could be powerful.
You know, I wonder though, those the Veterans Association, whether those were actually just, you know, by their own healthcare providers, you know, they were validated like everybody else. You know, there seems to be a lack of trust and understanding about how this worked. And it was very interesting, at least to me during this crisis, how everybody started out with, well, this has to be approved. And then it was like, well, okay, well, we'll do the sort of very, very low level approval at the national level. It's like only if you cannot get anything else. And basically the hospitals and the healthcare providers were approving things locally. I mean, that's what it ended up happening. And I don't know how we build that kind of trust in the system, right? For the kind of design you're talking, because even the Veterans Administration, I don't think it was ever nationally, you know, approved. They may have been sharing them amongst themselves, but you know, it's kind of a wild frontier, and so it feels like it's partially about trust and partially about access to, you know, really good knowledge and designs. I don't know what you guys think, but
I think in general, all I mean, mostly of the solutions that came up from this process is about this co-creation with the hospitals and with the, let's say, healthcare institutions. So I think that the people who goes, especially in the case I said for Germany, if they go directly from the normative, they said like, no, it doesn't have, and just stop the process a lot. So I think that it was like the let's say in the case here, hospitals where they had the need and say like, okay, we will just help in this process of using and certification and look if materials and design is approved. I think that is one of the case also, especially it was an exception that DIN, that it's like the institution of standardization open all a package of special standards to give open for everybody to reinterpret the production change. That is a very special case in which I think that let's say as a community we can, let's say in such a case, and also especially if it is papers about it, that it can also test something and let's say have a better dialogues with let's say in projects or especially directly with the government. I think it's a very important topic, but I think that it's I think that it connects also with a question that I have, because the manifest is also done for general open hardware and open know-how. So I had this question: what do you think is missing for open, let's say for open medical devices, so that you think that it could also be included in this manifest? Maybe for the other ones that we didn't heard.
Yeah, if anyone has answers to that question, we are developing a sort of version 2, or maybe even a version 1.1 of the open know-how standard. One area around medical devices is potentially, you know, just to sort of tie it in to almost the way that a lot of medical devices are understood in the field, about whether it's what level of, is it at an early trial, is it in a major trial, you know, where is it in that process? But but actually we're open to ideas on Adriana's question there. If anyone has any thoughts, please.
All right. No.
I don't know if it's just a thought or maybe a question. I mean, do you find yourself that you have a problem with having a way to populate, let's say, the database? Or are people just filling it in slowly? Are you scraping existing projects to just pre-populate?
Well, Emilio can tell you how he did the Apropedia tool.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, at the moment, it's been a manual process of encouraging people and projects to produce their own manifests, and where they need help, we've been able to help people out to do that. But really, it's the next stage of now taking version 1 and building it into some of the platforms where we might start being able to kind of get the number of manifests to significantly increase. And then when we have the search engine up and running as well, the open hardware search engine, it will make it a lot easier. Do you want to say your Apropedia experience, Emilio?
Yeah, and that's the reason why we were doing some code in R, because I just developed a simple script from a Google form. Before this tool was created, we did it on a Google form, and we took the spreadsheets and created the manifest. And if you go, for example, to openknowhow.apropedia.org, you can find a list of the manifest files. But we also created a version for MediaWiki that we're using for semantic searches and other things. So yeah, I mean that I think we are exploring how platforms will implement them, and probably platforms are the most difficult, because it would require for you to sit down and to go through them. And we're doing it with some of our interns who are working for Apropedia to go, for example, through all of the solar energy projects and document, add keywords, and explore a little about the documentation. But in the end, it's beautiful because you can search by very specific keywords and find the exact type of project that you need. So if you want to see that search functionality, I'm gonna post it here. It's on apropedia.org/search. And you will see how easily, I mean, it's still a beta, it's a prototype, but you can find by, as I mentioned before, by Sustainable Development Goals, all the projects. So you can find a specific project, for example, to the Sustainable Development Goal related to energy, clean energy, and solar cooking, and using this material, for example. And then you can find 2, 3, 4 projects, but it's easy for you to weed out from all the documentation. So if we have, for example, more platforms doing this, then we can create a crawler where you can find on 20 different platforms, all different projects. And then you can start, as Adriana was mentioning, having a more scientific approach to hardware. And you can start evaluating, clustering together, finding patterns in how people make things, design decisions. Yeah, I mean.
But I think this idea could be quite related to the distributed search engine of Fab Manager. Fab Manager already has this kind of idea that you host your own instance and replicate one Elasticsearch search engine. And I think that could work and scale really well.
Yeah, I haven't actually made that connection. That's a good point, actually. Because I've been looking at the Fab Manager tools as being related to the Open Nowhere standard around the geographic location of machines and tools, rather than the documentation side of things. But yeah, I mean, the crawler that Emilio mentioned for the search engine that's being developed at the moment by some people out of open source ecology in Germany and TU Berlin. And yeah, I mean, I think what you know, in some ways, open know-how, it's in its early stages. We've had a standard for a year, and we've been testing that standard carefully as sort of individual makers, and with Apropedia as one of the platforms that have been looking to integrate it. The next year is going to be about how we get into more of the mainstream platforms, including some of those who've helped us to develop the standard, like Wikifactory. But then working with Instructables and Thingiverse and so on to see how, you know, what needs to happen to begin to build this standard into their platforms. I think ultimately what I'm trying to imagine is, you know, make it as easy as possible to find hardware designs, open hardware, closed hardware, just hardware designs on the internet so that you can figure out what can be made near you. And, you know, I have this idea that I just right now, what I need as an aid worker, every now and again, I've got this sort of Google or Bing search, and then I've got a news search, and then I've got an image search, and then I've got a video search. I need a hardware search. And I need to be able to get to the point where I can find a ventilator design. I can find an emergency, you know, 15-ton heavy lifting airbag design, where I can find an inlay for my shoe, you know, as easily as I can find, you know, images of these things, or images of, you know, people's holiday snaps or whatever, you know, holiday destinations. I think that's where we're trying to get to with open know-how. I hope that the workshop today has given you some sense of where we're trying to get to, as well as how you can create these manifests yourselves. Are there any final comments or questions before we wrap up?
My only final suggestion, well, I think I talked too much maybe today, so I like to say I like to join the effort, because it's so aligned with things I have been doing last years that I think that's a formal, yeah, I want to jump in and help. But my only suggestion would be, instead of focusing right now on Thingiverse, that I think it's alive, but not so much, I think Prusa, just as I saw the face shield, fully documented. So I think that could be a good hook to get him involved and get it into the new platform he's developing.
Absolutely. I'll add that to the top of the list. Thank you. That's great.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So just as a disclaimer, my code broke. There are more manifests, but my code broke. So what I will do is I will send you. You will find later today on the GitHub repository